After more than 3 whole years, I have finally gotten myself a new camera. I've had the Sony Burano for a few weeks now, so today I want to share if I think it's actually worth that high price tag, if I have any regrets at all from buying it, and finally, why it might actually be better than people are expecting. One of the big questions I keep getting asked is how this camera compares to my old camera, which is the Blackmagic Ursa Mini G2. Well, there are some major differences in the way Sony have manufactured the Burano. Overall, the switch has gone quite well. Maybe that's because I have used an FX6 before and a Sony Venice before when I've rented them, and I used to own an FS5 in the past. The Burano definitely seems more professional than the Ursa did, and so it should do considering the price difference. The main surprises come in the form of image quality, which I will get more into later in the video. The Ursa Mini G2, which is still an amazing camera today, was starting to feel its age just a little bit. And I guess the Burano is a brand new camera with a brand new system from Sony. What really catches my attention would be comparing this new Burano to Blackmagic's latest camera, which is the cinema camera full frame. And the real question there is the Burano really worth 10 times as much money as the Blackmagic full frame costs? Fortunately for us, I now have both of those cameras, and I'm working on that video as we speak. So make sure you hit that subscribe button not to miss it, as it will be right around the corner as you watch this. Now, let's get into how the Burano has been in its first couple of weeks. Let me start off by saying I've not had this camera for very long, so this is far from a full review video and more of a first impressions, just letting you guys know what the positives and negatives have been in the first couple of weeks. When you first hold the Burano, the first thing you are going to notice is the build quality is exceptional. It is right up there alongside a Venice and an Alexa. When I first purchased my Ursa Mini G2, I remember thinking it felt so professional and well made. But now in perspective, I have it alongside the Burano. It kind of feels cheap and plasticky, but I guess comparing the prices, it is relatively cheap in costs. Pro AV was kind enough to invite me down to go and test out the Burano inside of their showroom. While I was there, I got the chance to test out the Burano alongside a lot of other cameras, including the FX6 side by side. When the Burano is at the side of an FX6, it makes it feel like one of those dumb pretend cameras that don't even work or turn on. Honestly, there is no comparison when these cameras are actually side by side. In my own opinion, the way that this camera and body is designed is one of the best I have ever seen or ever used. I am someone who loves to shoot on shoulder mount in like ENG style shooting, but I also love how Red do it with the box cameras, because I believe that the box camera shape is the best when you're in a controlled cinematic environment. What Sony have designed and made here is this kind of sturdy box camera that has more buttons than you will ever need, full-size XLRs, full-size HDMI, multiple SDIs, built-in NDs and IBIS. And then they also offer the display that can be turned into a viewfinder. It is relatively simple, it's not flawless, but I'm going to talk about all the downsides of this camera at the end in a section together. I already owned V-mounts and CF Express Type B cards, so pretty much as soon as I got the Burano out of the box, it was ready to go. And that isn't common for a cinema camera in this kind of price point, but that kind of follows the philosophy of how the FX6 and FX line cameras are designed. Another fantastic aspect of this camera is the online resources that Sony have made available. There is a ton of information available online. They provide tutorials with Alistair Chapman, they have live streams with Shane Hurlbut, they even have a virtual camera simulator on their website. Additionally, they offer the white papers, LUTs what are downloadable, and even compression charts. This really should be the standard when you are a manufacturer releasing an expensive cinema camera of this caliber. Okay, let's discuss image quality. The main question you see online is, does it feel like a bigger FX6 or does it feel like a mini Sony Venice? Well, I have some thoughts on this, and I don't think it's as simple as just picking one or the other. Comparing the image quality and comparing it to the FX6's image, I think the Burano falls much more into like an organic look. They are much trying to chase kind of what film used to look like rather than they are kind of a real representation of what your eyes would see. The Burano is not scared to kind of mute certain colours or push the greens a little bit in the direction it wants to do, where I feel the FX line of cameras is more trying to hit the greens to look as real as possible. I would feel much more confidence pairing this Burano up with a Venice than I would say an FX9 or an FX6. The colours are pretty amazing straight out of camera. They are really dense and feel like they have loads of information inside them. You do get a tiny bit of that kind of magenta skin tones now and then, what is pretty typical for a Sony camera, but this can be fixed in post relatively easy, and it can even be fixed in camera. But in my opinion, from the little bit of testing I have done so far, the Burano has some of the best skin tone reproductions I have seen, period. It is right up there with the Venice and the Alexa. When you have it on your shoulder using the viewfinder, with IBIS turned on, autofocus, using the variable ND in auto exposure, it honestly feels impossible to get a bad shot. And it doesn't end there. The new arm design from Sony is probably the best arm I've ever used. I personally used to like the arm from Shape, had the button in it to move it, but this is probably a slightly better design. Once you use the combined arm with one of Sony's FX line handles, where you can move the handles with a little lever, then you can move the arm also with a little lever, you will never want to go back. The buttons on the Burano and around the body are arranged really nicely and in logical places. Something that is massively underrated and I just don't hear enough people talk about is buttons that light up in the dark. This feels so premium when you have it on a camera, and they have taken that even further. With the customizable menu and the custom buttons, you can map a custom feature to a button, and at the side of that custom button there's a little light that lets you know whether that feature is on or off. For example, with my custom button 2, I've got that set to auto ND when the ND filter is engaged, and it is such a nice feature to just be able to glance at the body and see if that light is either on or off to know whether I am in auto mode. The screen that comes with the Burano is not OLED like the one on the Venice, but it is still extremely good. It is really sharp and looks colour accurate to my eyes. It is a massive improvement to the ones that come on the FX6 and the FX9. To me, those displays on those cameras look a bit odd. The motion is almost like video-y, and when I get my footage into my editing software, I always think to myself it looks so much better than it did on the in-camera display. All these things for me come together to make the usability of the Burano pretty unrivaled. If there was an award for capturing incredible footage super fast, this camera would definitely win it. My first negative has been a talking point for the first few weeks of the Burano's release, and that is rolling shutter. So how do I find the rolling shutter inside this camera? For a camera that costs as much as the Burano does, that is released in 2024, in a world and industry where global shutter sensors are finally becoming usable, it is just simply not good enough. Fortunately for me, I'm someone who's never had any trouble with rolling shutter. The way I shoot and kind of move my camera tends to be really controlled and steady. I'm the type of person that would pick a rolling shutter sensor with more dynamic range or better frame rates over a global shutter sensor, say if I had to sacrifice any of those features. I'm sure that the Venice has the fastest readout and the lowest rolling shutter of any non-global shutter sensor cinema camera on the market today. So for me, this does feel pretty purposeful from Sony, maybe not to cannibalise the sales on the Venice 2. It does improve a lot when you come out of 8.6K into 6K, and it improves even more when you turn IBIS on, obviously. If I were someone, say, who has experienced bad rolling shutter in the way I shoot, I would have probably returned this camera. There's also the problem with the viewfinder that you have probably seen maybe in another video, where it is quite tricky to screw it off and change it from kind of a viewfinder for your eye to a display that mounts on top of your monitor. I get Sony's thinking here that they have probably thought that with a camera being this expensive, if you was not running it on your shoulder, you would more than likely have an external monitor attached. And they're probably correct, but this does still feel like a bit of a mistake from Sony. With how fast and functional and usable this camera is, it just feels so weird to have something that you physically have to screw off to change from one shooting style to another. And for the deep menus of this camera, they have pretty much copied them over from FX6 and FX9. But where this becomes a positive is they have stole the quick menu from Venice, and Venice stole it from Alexa. And basically it is one of the best menus you can get for when you're doing like cinematic or cinematography. There are some weird quirks where features don't work in certain modes or resolutions that I'm still kind of trying to get my head around. A good example is when using clear image zoom, which is like Sony's kind of turn your prime lens into a bit of a zoom lens with almost lossless quality. This can only be used in one of the XAVC modes and cannot be used in the compress RAW, when I do feel that most people will be using that compress RAW in this camera. While we're talking about the compress RAW, this is not a huge deal, but it is just annoying that when you capture in RAW, there is no thumbnails inside the camera. My last complaint with the Burano seems quite small, but it did bug me. When the camera is mounted on your shoulder, the vent or the fan blows directly onto your ear. Now, this has been a problem for cameras over years that shoot on shoulder mounts, but I don't know, I just thought Sony maybe could have designed it in a better way to blow it in a different direction or just move the vent altogether. So this topic I left till last, as I believe it's one of the most disagreed topics when it comes to the Burano, and it is price. The Burano costs around 25,000 USD, give or take taxes and optional extras. So what is my view after spending my own hard-earned cash on this camera? Well, I think it might be just slightly too expensive, but that said, it is also the most feature-packed and usable camera that I've ever come across, as there is only one other camera for sale at this price point, which is the Red Raptor BV, which is an incredible cinema camera. But both the Red and the Sony are built for such different worlds, they're almost not in kind of competition as much as people probably think. If the Burano was say 20k USD or under, then I would probably say it would be the best high-end valued cinema camera on sale today. We do need to consider that Sony have probably spent a lot of money on research and development with all these new cameras and technologies that they've been bringing out over the last say like 3, 4, 5 years. And this is kind of like all of those features coming together in one camera. When you think about how popular the Venice and Venice 2 have been amongst like streaming sites and that whole kind of Netflix and Amazon production world, and the Burano can get image quality that is pretty damn close to it, then I think that this camera is going to be incredibly popular over the next 5 or 10 years for Sony. And for that reason alone, I don't have any regrets in purchasing this camera. Before you go thinking that you must get a new camera, know that you can improve the one you've got with this trick right here.